Jewish politics.
Internal politics, indeed. So let's go ahead and begin with a different topic. We are now into Parashat Toldot, the generations of Yitzchak, the life of Isaac, which is going to be dominated by a discussion of his two children. And the first thing that's going to happen when the children are born, well, what is the first thing that happens when children are born?
You're circumcised.
Even before you circumcise them, we're going to see something else happening. What's that? Yeah, apply to medical school. Shikah. Start saving for their college fund. Exactly.
They start that even before that.
You start even before they're born to save. Exactly. A baby comes out and you say, Mazel tov.
So,
What are we going to call this thing?
right.
Naming. I know we have a tradition of waiting until the circumcision to publicly announce a name, but at least biblically, they do not seem to have had that same hesitation as we're going to see. And so names are very, very important. And that's something you may have noticed already as you've been coming through Bereshit. And if you haven't, just wait till next week's parasha, where it's name after name after name after name for all of the sons, all of the tribes of Israel, as they are being named again and again and again by their mothers in sort of this competitive breeding program. As almost all of the names are very focused on the mother's relationships with the father. So, names. Do names matter?
They say so.
They say so? Who says so? But wouldn't a rose by any other name smell as sweet? I mean...
It's a way of honoring your ancestry.
It's a way of honoring your ancestors. It's a way of maintaining our heritage. The Midrash says, when it discusses why we merited to be brought out of Egypt, as one of the things that it gave us the credit, the zechut, the merit to be brought out, was that we hadn't changed our names. That is, despite adopting many of the Egyptian practices and ideas, one thing we hadn't changed was our names, and that was something that was very important.
Well, the Sephardic have a different tradition than the Eastern Europeans do.
Correct. Whereas in the Ashkenazic world, it is traditional to name a child after a deceased relative. There is a tradition in the Sephardic world to name a child after a living relative.
Yes, a lot of Marys.
What's that?
I said there are a lot of Marys.
A lot of Marys? You mean Miriam, yes.
M-A-R-Y.
Right. Which is usually meant to be Miriam, but yes, and that also has to do with the cultural influence of where they were living. Absolutely. It also makes it very difficult, though, sometimes to follow Sephardic ancestry, because you'll have father and son, father and son, father and son being named with just two names alternating, because a father would name his son after his father, and then that son would name his son after his father, and so it would just keep going back and forth, back and forth. So
one of our sons, our second son, is named after my father-in-law, and Howie is his name, Ben, his father's name, and my son Aaron is Aaron Ben Chaim.
Exactly, and if he keeps going with the next generation, then you'll be able to confuse genealogists for years to come. But do names matter for your future, not just for your ancestry?
In Judaism, the person's name will kind of somehow influence on the future person. The meaning of the name will influence.
Will it? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
Your character.
It influences the character?
If you call me a donkey,
Not that I would ever do such a thing. But yes, if you name your son Donkey, you might expect that his life will be a little bit harder. What's that old song? A Boy Named Sal? Boy Named Sue? Exactly. Where I knew I wasn't going to be there for you, so I gave you a name that would make you tough. Gee, thanks. In San Diego, growing up, there was a football player on our team known as Marion Butts. Marion, and he was enormous and powerful and strong, and the joke was he had to be, because you grow up with a name like Marion Butts, you either learn to stand up for yourself or you're going to be pushed down an awful lot. Michael, you had your hand up a second ago.
I was gonna say the same tradition that you grow into your name, so to speak. It's like almost a prophecy about who you're gonna be.
So this is going to be our question then, as we look into the names of Toldot. Why were the names chosen, and what did the names reflect about either the individual or about what is happening or what future they may have? Sound good? Okay, let's get a little Torah down then, so we have something to discuss. We are on page 146 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, which is, of course, chapter 25, verse 19. Already got a volunteer. Excellent.
This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac.
All right, let's pause here for a second, because, we've had one verse. That's plenty to discuss. Let's start making a little bit of a list here. So we've got two guys mentioned so far, two names, right? We've got Abraham, and we've got Isaac. Who named Abraham?
God.
And presumably we're just going to put it parents, because it doesn't say explicitly which one of his parents did, and as we're going to see, that can become a point of contention. We're going to find out that for all of the children of Rachel and Leah, they're being named by their mothers as opposed to their father. But we know that Avram was first named Avram by his parents, and then God modified his name to be Avraham, to be Abraham. So those are his namers. Isaac, who named him?
Sarah. Abraham.
God. God. The first person to mention who the name will be, or person, using the term loosely, is God. Is God. Now, it does say that Sarah calls him that, but God is the one who makes the prophecy, the proclamation, the statement that his name will be Yitzchak. And then she fulfills it by actually naming him Yitzchak. So we're going to have to decide, well, did she have a choice then of what to name him? And that's something for a later discussion. All right, let's go ahead and keep going and see what other names we get.
Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean.
All right, we're not terribly interested in all of those names because they come from a different branch of the family that doesn't exactly get a lot of respect. And Rivka, we don't have any tradition of how and when she was named. It's just plunked down as this is the name. So let's keep going.
Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord answered her.
All right, so we've got a foretelling about to occur, right? Just as we had a foretelling with the birth of Ishmael, and just as we had a foretelling with the birth of Isaac, we're now getting a foretelling of the birth of these two nations in Rivka's wombs, right? And we might expect that just as in the foretelling of Ishmael, that occurrence led to his name, and just as in the foretelling of Isaac, that occurrence led to his name, we might expect then, fill in the blank for me, that this foretelling might give us a hint of what the children are going to be named. So keep your eyes peeled.
Okay. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate people shall issue from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her time to give birth was at hand, and there were twins in her womb, the first one emerged red, like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born.
Okay. Names. Did they have anything to do with the pregnancy foretelling thing? Wait a minute. We got a foretelling about Ishmael, and his name becomes Ishmael. It got heard. We had a foretelling about Isaac and the whole laughter thing, and his name became Yitzchak for the laughing. We have a foretelling of these two nations in a womb, and the first one gets named Red Boy, or gets named for apparently his redness or his hairiness, although we're going to see there's a problem with that idea. And the second one gets named for a heel? For the heel? No?
He didn't let go.
He didn't let go. So indeed, the story is saying that after Esav came out, that Yaakov was holding on to the heel of his brother, and so they said, "Hey, look, he's holding on to the heel. Let's call him Heel Boy." We got this foretelling of destiny. This great statement of the younger shall rule over the older, although that's a little bit ambiguous, but at least that there are going to be two mighty nations, and you're naming one Heel Boy? And the other one, well, but does Esav mean red?
Or hairy?
Does Esav mean hairy? Now the word for hairy that's used here is se'ir. And the word for red is admoni. So neither of those seem to be linguistically linked to the word Esav. So even though oftentimes it's hard to see in the Hebrew what play on words is being used when the name comes, when it comes to Esav, there seems to be no play on words. It's like, look, he's red, he's hairy, let's name him something else. But those are the defining characteristics you've just pointed out. Shouldn't his name be focused on that? Mm-hmm. Well, let's find out.
What is the sentence, the last sentence? Isaac was 60 years old when they were going to have to do with the rest of it. It's just a statement?
Well, it's letting us know that between his marriage to Rivka and the birth of his children, there were 20 years. So it's just trying to fill in the timeline for us. And that was something we wrestled with a little bit more last week. And you can check YouTube and the handout for that. As we tried to figure out, well, how old does that make everyone for all of the other things? In particular, how old was Rivka then? All right, so let's at least see if we can sort out Esav. They called him Esav. All right? It's sometimes, again, hard to notice the difference in the Hebrew, but the naming phrase between Esav and Yaakov is different. If you'd like to turn your eyes to the actual Hebrew text, even if you're not perfect in Hebrew, you can still follow the differences. In verse 25, in the middle of the line, which is the line under where it says 25 in the Hebrew, it says, Vayikre'u, right? And they called him, right? We're going to say Shemo. They called his name, right? Vayikre'u. They called, they named. But when we get down to verse 26, where we have Yaakov being named, it's Vayikra, which is the singular form of and he called, maybe. So we're going to have to try and find out why in the first verse for naming Esav is it a plural, a they verb, and why is it a he verb when it comes to Yaakov? We understand the grammatical difference there? Okay? All right, so let's first of all figure out who the they were. Who were they that were naming Esav? And why did they name him what they did? So who'd like to start off with the most commonly cited midrash on this point? Don't all volunteer at once. It overwhelms me. Thank you.
Oh, me?
No, Marion had.
They called him Esau. They all called him this because he was complete, made and fully developed with hair like the one many years old.
All right, so we'll have to work about the they a little bit more, but at least we can see now where the midrash is saying the word Esav comes from, that it comes from asui, that it comes from the verb meaning made. And they're saying, why did they call him Esav? Because he was so hairy, he was so formed like a grown-up child, that they said, hey, this one's already done. He's you know, fully baked, or whatever you want to put it. He came complete with all the parts. You know, he's got the hair and everything. So they called him Esav, according to this midrash, because he was fully formed. He was already hairy like an adult. Okay? So what the midrash is trying to do here is say that the explanation of him being red and hairy is linked to his name by the observation of the bystanders. Okay? That Esav is their interpretation of his hairiness. Does that make sense? Okay?
And by bystanders, this was as soon as he was born.
As soon as he was born, right?
This is when this.
Correct. As he came out, they said, wow, this guy's like full hair. So let's name him Fully Done.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
He's complete. He's complete boy. We're going to get heel boy in a second, but he's complete boy.
Okay.
We're following the pattern here?
Yes.
All right, so if we have Abraham being named by his parents and then modified by God, and Isaac having his name established by God, even if his mother's the one that says it, Esau is named by
This is
the crowd. We'll just say it because it's a nice short word to write up there, rather than bystanders or the other people who were in the delivery room at the time. He was named by the crowd. He was crowdsourced. You know, everyone got together and said, what do you think's the best name for this? Named by committee. He was named by the group, at least according to this classic midrash. All right? But it's not the only word on the matter.
they, those who saw him.
Even Ezra says, indeed, it was they of those who were around that were naming him. Now, this is trying to clarify because there's another option for a plural, right? It could be the crowd, or it could be, who would be another likely plural group that could have named him?
Parents.
Well, parents. Right? I mean, if I tell you that I have some good friends who just had a baby and they named him Frank, who do you think the pronoun they refers to? The parents. So we might have assumed that the they in this was the parents, but even Ezra and apparently the Midrash as well seems to be leaning towards the idea that no, it wasn't his parents that gave him that name, it was everybody else. And we're gonna wrestle with who was doing all the naming in this scenario, because that may not sit with us very well. After all, if names are very important for both honoring the past, although that's a later Jewish custom, and as well as deciding the character of the child now, or reflecting something unique about their nature, or about how they came to be, or about a hope for the future, just having everyone say, oh look, that guy looks like he's already done, and saying, okay, that's a good name, seems a little weak. All right? All right. So now we have to deal with the question of Yaakov. Because after all, Jacob, as I said, the verb that goes for Jacob's naming is in the singular. It's not a they did it, it's a he, or it, or it could be, according to some grammatical references, it could be even a passive voice, meaning, and he was named. But the Midrash tends to focus on the idea that there was somebody naming Jacob. It wasn't just hiding who named him. And now we just have to figure out who it was. Want to keep on for us?
He called him Yaakov. The Holy One, blessed be he, gave him this name. He said, you named your firstborn. This refers to those who named Esau. I too will name my firstborn. This is what is written, and he named him Yaakov.
Okay. So the he, according to Midrash Tanchuma, should be capitalized. That the reason why this verb is different than the first one is everybody else seemed to name Esau, but God was saving naming rights for Jacob. And God was going to name Jacob. Why? Because he's chosen. God knows which one is supposed to be first. This reintroduces the notion of the importance of the foretelling. That the foretelling said that the younger is going to be greater, and God is verifying that by choosing the name, even if the name has nothing to do with the superiority of the younger. Do you understand what happened there? They shifted the emphasis on the foretelling from the name itself to who had the naming rights. And by doing so, they've kept the pattern of saying that a name matches the foretelling, but they've said the naming matches the foretelling instead. So it's trying to save some of the importance of the foretelling in the naming process, even if the name itself is still just heel boy.
According to this midrash, God is saying that Yaakov, I too will name my firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
So he was declaring even from the onset, from the very beginning, that Yaakov was to be considered the firstborn.
Absolutely, which is what we've just seen in the verses right before the birth. Exactly, with the whole 2 nations, and one shall be mightier and the older shall serve the younger. That's God's answer to Rivka of what's happening. And so God has already picked the younger to be superior to the older.
But God was also the one who determined which one was literally going to be born.
Correct, which is a whole nother class. And indeed, the commentators have to wrestle with that question a lot, which is, well, wait a minute. If God knew that the, in quote, younger one was going to serve, or was going to be the leader, why not just make the younger one the first one and be done with it? I mean, after all, God couldn't arrange which one left the womb first. God can flood the entire world and create the universe and do all those other things, but he can't arrange the order down the birth canal. And so the commentators have to wrestle with that. We're not going to wrestle with that today. We're not going to wrestle with that today because it is a much larger conversation. But it's very good and close reading. I'm noticing that. But what they do try to say is that since God already foretold that the younger was going to be mightier than the older, therefore God has the right to name the younger one, whereas he didn't really care about naming the older one. Does that make sense? Okay. However, that's not the only explanation.
Another explanation is that his father called him Yaakov because of the holding of the heel, and that's Rashi.
Yeah. So Rashi points out from the other midrashim that no, actually, the reason why it was a he is because it was dad. Rather than dad and mom, or rather than dad plus group, it was either God naming Jacob or his dad, Isaac, naming Jacob. One or the other. And Devar Acher, take your pick. This is another explanation. There's multiple opinions on this. Take your pick. And again, the second explanation leaves us with the same thing, which is, well, no, you can say that God did it if you want, but we're still left with a name that is not exactly the most noble of sentiments. And would we really want to ascribe that name to God? Seems a little inferior, doesn't it? Okay, but you got another question over here or comment?
I think there's a common thread through the whole thing where God picks people out, which is not necessarily according to birth.
Oh, absolutely. The entire book of Genesis, as well as into other parts of the Tanakh as well, but Genesis in particular, the youngest always comes out on top. And that is absolutely contrary to the culture of the day, where the oldest was supposed to be the one who was number one and always receive extra. But throughout the book of Genesis, if you're the eldest, you know you're not going to be the number one person. It's like the only guaranteed spot of losers is being the eldest. And you want to be the youngest, or almost the youngest in the case of Joseph. So yeah, that's a very definitive pattern that God has his own way of picking winners and losers that is different than what the cultural norm was.
We could also read into it that perhaps that's why he's holding you to the heel. He's saying, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be first, I am.
Absolutely. You know, the notion that you can read back into it, and that is certainly within our right as modern day commentators, is to say, no, the metaphor of the heel and the naming of him Yaakov was that he was trying to trick his brother. He was trying to supplant him. That he was trying to show that the other guy shouldn't have gone first, that he was the rising star, and that he would overtake his brother, that he was hot on his brother's heels and ready to overtake. So indeed, that may be the connection between his name and the foreteller.
If you look at his future, that's what he does. He overtakes his brother.
As was prophesied.
The heel, so to speak, and pulls him back.
Well, we're going to get to that, so to speak, in a little bit more detail, because there is a second naming for Yaakov. This is not the only time Yaakov gets a name. We go through from here the story of him and Esau, where they do a little negotiation over some stew, and Esau sells his right as the firstborn. Does that make sense? Okay, this is often a point that people get confused about. When we say he sells his birthright, what we mean is, as we already discussed, the eldest was considered to have a privileged place in the line of inheritance, right? So whenever somebody would die, you would apportion their property by the number of sons plus one, and then whoever was the eldest would receive a double portion. So if Isaac only has 2 sons, when he dies, you divide his property into 3, and 2/3 of that would go to the eldest, and 1 would go to the youngest. Got the math? When Esau comes in hungry and rather impatient, he agrees to sell that bonus third to his brother in exchange for the soup. Got that? Okay. Which will be important when we decide whether or not Jacob actually cheated anybody when it comes to later. Because what's going to happen later in chapter 27, go ahead and turn the pages, is not about the birthright, but is about the bracha, but about the blessing. So we're on page 153, chapter 27 in Genesis. And a blessing is not a part and parcel of the birthright. That is to say, the eldest does not necessarily have the expectation that his father is going to bless him in exclusively compared to his other siblings. And yet that seems to be what Isaac's intent is. And that's what Jacob is going to slide in, and we'll put it in quotes, and steal. Make sense? So he bought the right for inheritance, but he didn't buy, because it wasn't a standard option within the inheritance laws, but he didn't buy the blessing. So when Isaac gets ready to bless his son, that's when Jacob is going to move in. All right, so let's continue with the text now on page 153, chapter 27. Sandy, you want to keep reading for us so I don't have to hunt for a volunteer?
Sure. When Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, he called his oldest son Esau and said to him, "My son?" He answered, "Here I am." And he said, "I am old now, and I do not know how soon I may die. Take your take your gear, your quiver and bow, and go out into the open and hunt me some game. Then prepare a dish for me such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my innermost blessing before I die."
All right, very touching scene between father and favorite son. We found out earlier in the parashah that Esau was Isaac's favorite, and he wants to give his son this blessing of his soul, this innermost blessing, as the JPS translation puts it. Okay.
Rebekah had been listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau had gone out into the open to hunt game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I overheard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a dish for me to eat, that I may bless you with the Lord's approval before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make them a dish for your father, such as he likes. Then take it to your father to eat, in order that he may bless you before he dies. Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. If my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster and bring upon myself a curse, not a blessing." But his mother said to him, "Your curse, my son, be upon me. Just do as I say and go fetch them for me."
All right, so Rivka shows herself to be a very shrewd woman. She sees that this blessing is going to go to the son that's not the one who's supposed to get it. After all, remember, she received the prophecy when they were in her womb that the younger was the one that God was going to favor. So clearly the blessing belongs to him, at least in the eyes of God, so she needs to arrange that it happens. By the way, this is not a model for domestic tranquility and husband-wife relations. If you're talking to people about to get married, you don't say this is the way you settle differences of opinion between parents. Rebekah and Isaac should have talked together about the future disposition of blessings and inheritances among their children, rather than using this particular methodology. But
What is it that Isaac does to warrant his being listed in the lineage, Abraham and Isaac? I mean, he doesn't seem to do much, and if left to his own devices, he would have blessed the wrong one. I mean, things happen to him, but he's not doesn't move Judaism farther.
Well, he does and he doesn't. You're right, that the dramatic stories of Abraham and the very dramatic stories of Jacob are absent in the narrative of Isaac, or where they do occur, he tends to be the sort of passive observer,
Right.
Moved by the forces around him.
Right. We should go Abraham, Rivka.
Abraham, Rivka, we could just, and indeed there is a strain of the tradition that says that Rivka was almost the reincarnation of Abraham, that she is the essence of his spirit. She's the one who is commanding and controlling the line of the family. On the other hand, Isaac does make all the right decisions in the end. He does get where he needs to be, and he does do what he needs to do. And the fact that we may be more attracted to the dramatic characters doesn't diminish his contribution as being one of the founders of our people. And it's unfortunately we're spoiled by Hollywood. We want the actor who had the most lines to be the hero, not the one who actually was there and did what needed to be done to make sure that we continued as we did.
It was once explained to me that Isaac was so traumatized by the handout, seriously, that he was kind of like just really laid back the rest of his life. He wasn't afraid to do anything, and was a transitional character.
So that's one very common commentary. The crux of that also lies on the idea that when his father laid him out on the altar and the heavens opened above, that the angels wept, and that their tears fell into his eyes, which is what his vision is dimmed. So the idea being that a person had been spiritually either uplifted or traumatized, depending upon your take on the Akedah, and left unable to interact with this world with clarity and purpose, could very well explain it.
As if he was actually sacrificed or metaphorically sacrificed. He was beyond this world.
Correct. Either in a negative sense or in a positive sense. It is a very common line of commentary. I don't think we have to go that way. And indeed, I do want to also preserve, as I was trying to say in my own opinion, that just because he wasn't the action superhero that his father and that his son is going to be, and wasn't the one in a strong, dynamic way manipulating the world around him, doesn't mean that he didn't do absolutely what was necessary. The great example is from the end of David's life, that once he gets over the great crisis of him and Bathsheba and the son that was born and then dies, he basically has learned his lesson completely. And it finishes off with his life saying, and for the rest of his life he did what was right in the eyes of God. Now, on to the next guy. That once David got it right, his life no longer receives narration. Because what are you going to narrate? Somebody who's going about doing their life right, that's not who you make the reality TV show about. You know, you take the people from Jersey Shore to make the reality TV show because they're the people who are messing up continually that make for much better TV. So Isaac, we might, you know, say, you know, what a little, you know, nobody, Nevesh. Yeah, I mean, it's almost offensive to say that about one of the Avot, but you know, we might feel that way because he doesn't make this strident, you know, stand as a character. But nevertheless, I think it's important that we do honor the so-called Neveshes that do the real work of being righteous on a day in, day out basis, but don't make the screenplay. Okay, so that was a very good transgression.
He wants to say something.
Oh, sorry.
Well, we take again Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
and we think of him as a little boy when his father offered him up.
Correct.
But he wasn't. He was a real full-grown man, and he did it voluntarily.
According to some commentators.
Right.
So that was again what we went over a little bit last week as well of how old Isaac would have been. That he was either 37, if you do the math based upon the death of Sarah as being happening at exactly the same time as the Akedah, or he was substantially younger, if we believe that there was a length of time between the Akedah and the death of Sarah. But that was last week's discussion, and opinion is divided. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish up because we need to get to the second naming of Jacob before we can discuss more of the commentary about naming.
He got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared a dish such as his father liked. Rebekah then took the best clothes of her older son Esau, which were there in the house, and had her younger son Jacob put them on. And she covered his hands and the hairless part of his neck with the skins of the kids. Then she put in the hands of her son Jacob the dish and the bread that she had prepared. He went to his father and said, "Father," and he said, "Yes, which one of my sons are you?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Pray sit up and eat of my gain, that you may give me your innermost blessing."
Okay, so who is he?
Really?
Well, who does he say he is? Oh, we need to work on our punctuation. According to the Midrash, he doesn't lie. You're reading it incorrectly. You're reading it incorrectly because the English makes us read it incorrectly. So if you look very, very carefully at the Hebrew, and we're in verse 19, he says, "Anochi Esav Bechorecha," which the JPS translation reads to mean, "I am Esav, comma, your firstborn." But there is a very common and very famous midrash that says, no. The comma should be after Anochi. Anochi, I am, meaning I am who I am, and Esav Bechorecha, and Esav is your firstborn.
Okay.
I love.
No.
Okay. So it works in Hebrew more easily than it does in English. Okay. So in Hebrew we have this pronoun anochi, right, which is partially unnecessary. Hebrew is not really big on pronouns, where it can get away without them. It likes to just leave pronouns implied by the sentence. Or implied by the verb itself. Now, in this kind of sentence, you don't have another verb, and that's maybe why the pronoun is there, but it does give us room for operating when it comes to interpretation. So he says, Anochi, I am. It's me. And Esav is your firstborn. Not I'm Esav, but I'm me, and Esav is your firstborn. So he puts a nice big comma.
There's no is.
That and that's because there is no is in Hebrew.
But there's no and either.
And there's no and either. Correct.
But if he were going to say, I'm Esau, wouldn't he have said, Ani Esau?
Well, Anochi is a stand-in for Esav. I mean for Ani. Anochi and Ani are almost interchangeable.
I am.
They both essentially mean I.
So the sentence is translated, I am?
Esau, your firstborn, where do we go from here?
No. It's just saying, which one of my sons are you? Well, I'm me, and Esau is your firstborn.
Okay, so he's not lying.
He's not, well, according to the Midrash, he's not lying. He's merely listing the sons of Jacob, the sons of Isaac. And he's saying, well, I'm me, and Esau is the firstborn. Now, it's not exactly what we would call a full disclosure sentence. And that may be one of the reasons why Isaac becomes suspicious.
Then why the hair?
Well, and then, that's going to become a bit of an issue. It's like, well, wait a minute, if he's not lying here, isn't he lying with the whole costume thing?
If you make that into two sentences, I am me, period.
Right? And Esau is your firstborn.
That makes it two separate things. I am me has nothing to do, it's a separate sentence. You're Esau is your first son.
But remember, in Hebrew there is no punctuation, in biblical Hebrew.
Don't you, but a pause would be the same as a period.
But how do you know where to pause? It's just a series of words.
That's the way you read it.
And the way we read it, indeed, can support this midrash, because the trope that's used, at least, has more of a pause between Anochi and Esav than there is between Esav and Bechorecha. Esav Bechorecha is clearly in the trope a continual phrase. That is to say, between Esav and Bechorecha, there shouldn't be a pause. Esav, your firstborn, would be the way you would read that. Whereas between Anochi and Esav, there should be a moderate pause.
Exactly.
So that would lend itself to the idea of putting a big comma there or semicolon and saying, Anochi, Esav Bechorecha. I am. Esav is your firstborn. It's not exactly smooth, but then Esav was rough.
The Mi'atavani, it gets translated as, which one of my sons are you? But doesn't it just say, who are you, my son?
Correct. Who are you, my son?
So then the
Then answer
makes more sense.
Well, I'm me, and Esav is your firstborn. Okay, so we could indeed say that Jacob is not renaming himself here. On the other hand, if we want to say it like the JPS translation, then Jacob has renamed himself Esav. Who are you? I'm Esav. He's renamed himself. Now he's lying in that version, but it is a form of self-renaming. But we're going to see that Esav has different ideas. All right, we're running low on time, so let's zip through.
Praise it up and lift my name, that you may give me your innermost blessing. Isaac said to his son, how did you succeed so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God granted me good fortune. Isaac said to Jacob, come closer that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not.
Okay, so they go through I'm just going to try and save a little time. They go through the whole exchange about who are you really? He never actually says explicitly in a way that is incontrovertibly, I am Esav. But he does answer his father's question, are you really Esav? And he says, Ani, I'm me, is how the Midrash sort of reads that. And Isaac seems satisfied in some way with this, despite the incongruities of voice and hair, and gives him the blessing. However, we then go on to find out that just after Jacob leaves, Esav comes in, and there's a bit of a problem. So go ahead and turn to page 158, which is, we're going to hit verse 35, where Esav is crying to his father, wait, I need a blessing too, I need a blessing. You see where we are? Bless you, indeed. If only it were that easy. You got where we are?
Yes. But he answered, your brother came with guile and took away your blessing. Esau said, was he then named Jacob, that he may supplant me these two times?
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
First he took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing.
Okay. So the English, again, is a little bit clunky. Was he then named Jacob that he might? Is implying almost like a question, but it would could be also translated as being, so that's why he was named Jacob, because he has supplanted, he has overcome me, which is based on that same root as the word Yaakov. And that they're making the play that Esau is recasting Jacob, rather than being healed, to being supplanter, which is based upon the same root.
But that's not a true statement. He didn't take his first birthright. He gave it to him. No,
He sold it.
he
Right.
sold
It wasn't a gift, but it was a fair sale.
No, but he's saying that he took it from him, like it was a thievery going on.
Imagine that. Someone of Esau's upstanding character not realizing that he actually made that trade. Somebody who did something wrong that when it comes back to bite them says, I didn't do that. I mean, it's a good example of Esau's character, that he had the right, perhaps, to claim that he stole my blessing. But you're absolutely right that the text has made it very clear that Esau sold his right as firstborn, and he should not be complaining about that. But that isn't Esau's nature. Esau is a different sort of person. He's not looking for what's fair or just. He's looking for what he wants. And now he's got nothing. On the other hand, if we wanted to give him a little bit of slack, we could say that Jacob exploited his condition when he sold him the birthright. After all, no 1/3 of the inheritance of all of Isaac's goods was worth a bowl of soup. I mean, come on, that's not a fair deal. And you're supposed to make a deal for someone about a life-changing event when they're famished and exhausted? Is that the right time to take advantage of someone? So, to be fair, we could argue that Jacob was unfair to his brother when he made that deal in the first place. However, we know, as being the omniscient reader who's read through this before, that in the end, Jacob was the right choice. But, that's the benefit of having read the end.
Okay, you could say something, because I read somewhere that the birthright and the blessing are two separate things.
Correct.
Okay, but then if they're two separate things, then he's not entitled to the blessing.
No, he could. I mean, it's his father's gift to bestow on whoever he chooses.
Right, exactly. It's not because he's the firstborn.
No. But his father had chosen to give it to him.
Oh, okay.
And Jacob deceived their father. And if he hadn't done that, then Esau would have gotten the blessing. And so it's like someone came and took your lottery winnings by forging a ticket. I won. My dad said me. And yet when I showed up, someone else had already taken it. So that's why he's feeling so wronged here.
Isn't there also I know I've heard this before, so I assume it's a midrash somewhere, that Jacob wasn't completely fooled.
You mean Isaac?
He knew of...
You mean Isaac wasn't completely fooled?
Isaac wasn't completely fooled. He knew of what happened between Rivka and God prior to the birth, and he knew what the order was, but he didn't have any way to make it happen. And so they do this ruse so that he can, in all legitimately, say, gee, I didn't know.
Correct. There are midrashim that try to substantiate what he did as being a choice, rather than Jacob being the whole deceiver in the act. It doesn't fit perfectly with the whole text. The fact is that Isaac responds quite negatively when he finds out. He shakes and he trembles, and he seems to be really broken up that he gave the blessing to the wrong person. Whether or not that's part of an act, that's for us to continue to debate another time. But yes, there is such a midrash that does say that he was complicit. And then there are other midrashim that say at this point, when Esau admits to having lost the birthright, whether it was stolen or given, and we could argue about again another time, that Isaac realizes, in that case, it really was God's decision who was supposed to get it, because clearly it's all worked out for the best in the end. Because if this guy was the kind of guy that would have sold his birthright for soup, then why would I bother to give him the blessing? Okay, let's go ahead and take a look up.
So what actually goes along with the blessing?
Well, the blessing. Everything that Isaac prophesies will happen for the person he's blessing will happen, is the belief. Will come to pass, exactly. So when he says, you will rule, that is what makes it so that Jacob will rule. And the idea that the blessing was just nice words is very thin. The blessing of Isaac is a determining factor for the outcome of the future of these two boys. So we can talk in more, again, there's so many other things to talk about in this parasha, in more detail about what it means to give someone a blessing and the tangible impact that has on reality, as opposed to just making someone feel good. And that would help us understand also why he has no blessing left to give for Esau. It's not that he can't come up with other words, it's that the blessing he already gave away was so expansive and covered so much that what's left to bless you with? You know, I can't bless you with something that I don't have anymore because I already gave it to the other guy. Because it's real. It's not just nice words. Okay, let's get back to the names because we're running out of time, and I want to get through the other commentaries. And when we come around the Toldot next year, we can talk about other things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read in the interest of our clock, and we're picking up. We're in the middle of that front page where it says Rashi wonders, and this is one of the commentators on Rashi who's pointing out, why does Rashi need to comment on both the naming of Esau and the naming of Yaakov? Because usually you would think that only one of those namings was different and therefore worthy of comment. Why would you comment on both of them? I mean, surely one of them was the standard naming language and the other was the odd one out. So this is his explanation. Rashi wonders why it is different from the naming of the sons of Yaakov, whom are all named by their mothers. We're talking about all the 12 tribes. And she called his name Reuven, and she called his name Shimon, and so on for all of them. For it is well and good by Yishmael and Yitzchak, we didn't put Yishmael up on our list, that they were called such based on divine statement, and so too for Levi, and afterwards as well. But here, in the case of Yaakov and Esau, why did Rivka not call names to her sons based on the events which happened to her, with the struggling and the seeking from counsel from God, just as Leah and Rachel did regarding the events of Reuven? Elohim saw my suffering, or for Yosef, that Elohim is gathered in my shame, or God should have me another son, and so on for all of them. Therefore he, meaning Rashi, explained and they called his name Esau, that all of them called him such. That is to say, that the others preempted in calling him this name, for as soon as the others saw him, before she was able to call him a name, they already called him this. Therefore it is not written, and she called. We got that? Mm-hmm. So why was it a crowdsourced name for Esau? Because everyone jumped in and named the kid before she could. Now, we may, if we have enough friends, know people like this. That maybe their parents wanted or even gave them a name, but everybody else jumped in and gave them a nickname that has stuck with them for the rest of their life, whether they or their parents wanted it. Well, that's kind of what he's saying has happened here. And that no matter what Rachel, or no matter what Rivka wanted to name the boy, Esau was what stuck with him. And the notion that part of his character, part of his nature, was determined by the gut reaction of those around him is slightly, should make us feel a bit sad for the boy. You know, that he was prejudged by everyone around him from the moment he came out. And that sort of impetuousness begins to mark his character straight away. And so too, and he called his name Yaakov, it is necessary for Rashi to explain as well. For it should have stated, and she called. Meaning, again, usually we see that the mothers are the ones giving names later on, and even before this, so it should have been here too. Therefore, Rashi explains that the Holy One, blessed be He, did so. That is to say, this too was based on divine directive, just as Ishmael and Yitzchak. Turn the page. But Rashi continues, another explanation, this Devar Acher, his father called him this based on the seizing of the heel. That is to say, his father preceded her in calling him this name. That the father, Isaac, preempted, since he saw the seizing of the heel before she was able to call him a name. For certainly, and this is a great little bit of practical interpretation, a woman sitting on the birthing stone is not able to call a name to the child immediately after the birth, because of the birth pangs which are yet upon her for some time after birth. And within that time, Yitzchak saw the seizing of the heel and called him based on this action, just as all others did regarding Esau. So the idea being that it was Jacob that named him, and the question is, well, why did Jacob name him? Why didn't Rachel or Rivka name him? Was because Jacob saw it first. Isaac saw it first, right? Because she was busy with that whole giving birth thing. And when he saw the heel, he went, wow, there's something you don't see every day. You know, that's a pretty unusual birth situation. I'll name him after that unusual facet that's happening at birth. And poor Rivka's going, no, I had a perfect name picked out for him based on the prophecy of God. And now you've named him after the oddity of his birth. You know, such is life. Okay. In Brachot, we see in the Talmud, how do we know that a person's name affects his life? To come back to the question of, well, what did it matter what the name was going to be? Said Rabbi Elazar, it is in line with the verse of Scripture, come, behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth, which is taken from the Psalms. But do not read desolations, but rather names. And the idea here being, they're based on the same root again in Hebrew, the idea being that it is God who sets the names in truth. And that is going to therefore be a sign of our character or the things that we will do. Got that? Okay. But just one last little section, then I'll let you go. And why was the name of Abraham changed and the name of Yaakov changed, but the name of Isaac was not changed? I mean, think about that for a second. Abraham began life as Avram, and God changed his name. And Yaakov begins life as Yaakov and later has his name changed to Israel. But Isaac, the guy in between them, you know, going back to he was an uneventful character, his name stays the same. He's born Yitzchak and he dies Yitzchak. And nowhere does his name get changed in between. Well, because these other were given their names by their parents. That is to say, Avram was given his name by his parents, and Yaakov was given his name by his parents, and Isaac was given his name by God. As it is said, and you shall call him Yitzchak, right? So, therefore, Isaac didn't need to get a name change, because his name was already ordained by God. Whereas Avram and Yaakov, those were names that were just picked by people, just picked by people. This is, of course, a different idea than saying God didn't pick Yaakov. That was his dad, who just was noticing the novelty of birth. 4 persons were named before they were born. And these are Isaac, Ishmael, Josiah, and Solomon. And then the explanation for each of those is given. And then we skip down where it says, this is the case with regard to the righteous people. God may give some of them names before they are born. But regarding the wicked people, Scripture says the wicked are strangers from the womb. They are not given names before they are born, from the Yerushalmi.
And they pick those 4 people as being the righteous people?
And those are the 4 names that are picked as being the 4 examples of righteous. Okay?
Is there any measures to support the idea that Esau got his revenge many, many, many years later because Esau is Edom, which becomes Rome?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There are numerous ideas that the relationship that is being laid out here between Jacob and Esau comes back to haunt us first in the historical nation of Edom and their interactions in dealing with Israel, and then in Edom as Rome, and then Edom as Christianity in later medieval thinking. So yes, the relationship that's happening between these 2 brothers is seen as a reflection over and over again in Israel's relationship with other nations, and not for the good, and often in a way that is, as you say, revenge for what happened here.
No, but that's also to fulfill that prophecy that you have 2 nations there that will war against each other.
Indeed, and then the very end of the blessing that Isaac gives Esau gives him an option to break free. And it's that end that you will eventually be able to break the yoke from your neck, from your brother, that is seen as being the historical lead-up to why it is that Edom eventually becomes dominant over us. Why it is that this other nation that was supposed to be subservient to us eventually becomes in a superior position. But that, I think we did that last year when we talked about how Esau turned into Edom when we were talking about Toldot. I can give you the handout another time for that discussion.
Why would Esau had been named something, an Arabic word?
Oh yeah, sorry, we didn't really discuss that. But the interesting fact is that the word Esau is very, very similar to an Arabic word that means rough or hairy, which would be perfectly in line with the birth. That is to say, that would explain why the word Esau was chosen, rather than having to go to the asui, the idea that he was complete. And the idea would be that it wasn't an Arabic word, but that it was a word based upon a antecedent, an earlier language that has fallen out of use within Hebrew, but was preserved within the linguistic family of Arabic. So the idea here is that it's not that he was named for an Arabic word, but that Arabic preserves a meaning to that word that has been lost to Hebrew.
Well, this huge crowd of people that are watching this very intimate moment, and the lady is saying, "No, wait, just get it, and they don't. They have taken they just grabbed this right from her.
That's the way the Midrash portrays it exactly, and a very important reminder that when we're trying to set something in motion and trying to create a destiny for ourselves or our children, crowdsourcing isn't always the way to go.
No, absolutely.
A little privacy can help.
Is there a difference in the meaning, and I'll use Abraham and Avram
Mm-hmm.
as in the names? What does Avram mean as opposed to what?
Yes, when it comes to Avram and Avraham, there's definitely a difference in meaning. Sarai and Sarah, not as much. But the notion of Avram is that he's going to be this father, but Avraham introduces this notion of multitude, that it's going to be a father of a lot, rather than just a little. So the changing of Abraham's name definitely changes his destiny. Whereas Yisrael is the second name for Yaakov, is less a change in destiny and more a change in character. So there are many differences of many specific ways that each name change happens to each individual. You can't make just a general rule for all of it. Okay, hope to see everybody on Shabbat.